So hello everyone, hello again. I'm Mesrop Hovhannisyan, but most people know me as Mes. Currently I work in ArsThanea Warsaw, a studio with quite small studio, but full of talented people. And thanks for having me today. So today's presentation we call Art Directing Simulation with Houdini. Because as an FX artist, our main goal is to control and direct our simulations. I'm sure many of us had a similar situation like that we make a setup that we are quite proud of and happy. And once we get asked to do small tweak, everything falls apart. And we are like, okay, why? Because we didn't think flexibility and control in our mind when making it. So that's what I believe when it comes to FX artists. That's our main goal, to always learn, discover new ways to control the software, the FX, the animation, and by the time iterate faster with simulation time and also with iteration time. Yeah, but that being said, today's presentation is not only about simulation. So if you are not an FX artist, still you can get, I hope you can get something useful for you, any tips and tricks to speed up your own workflow. And even if you are not using Houdini yet, I hope it will inspire you to start using it at some point in your career. Because just before this presentation, I had a chance to quickly go to our participant list, and I see that we have quite of a variety of users, quite experienced, people who are just starting it, and people who are looking to start. So let's get started. I will start by playing my reel quickly, which I edited today. Okay, so our presentation will consist mainly of three parts. First, we will go to the flip simulation and ways to art direct them. We will have also ways to do fast collision with high fields. That's quite a nice tip. Tips for simulating long water streams when we don't have to care about long pre-sims. Optimization and speed, and a couple of words about meshing. This will be our first part. Second part will be, interestingly, about not simulating. So when to know to not simulate, because not always we can be flexible with the simulations. Mostly it will be about making parametric tools to animate your masks, animate your sources, and even something that looks like a simulation, but it's actually not. That will be quite interesting. And third part, we'll call it post-sim control. It's mostly things that will happen after the simulation for the extra control. So we will be using pretty simple and standard tools like magnets, attribute transfer, any kind of point deformers that you can manipulate points to control our particle simulation, flip simulation, and even volume simulation. That's going to be quite fun part of the presentation. Okay, so that's it about the overview. Let's start with the first part. Okay, so art directing fluids. I will play the R&D that we're gonna talk about. So this is the R&D I did, which we will talk about in a minute. So the goal for this R&D was to test that controllability, how to control the splash, and to get your desired shape of the splash. So I will open up Houdini shortly for this. Okay, but before starting, a couple of words about realism in simulations. Because if you think about it, Flip Solver itself, by default, it's designed to behave like a realistic voter. So for me, when I'm trying to reach any kind of realistic approach, I try to keep my extra forces, extra velocities as less as possible. Main focus is to initial velocity, just to tell the solver what to use with, what to start with, and the solver will handle the rest. So my next slide, just keep it simple. I use this word like don't force the forces in a way that when you add forces, you're like, I want to behave this way or this way. You keep adding forces on top of forces, and your simulation feels less natural and a bit forced. So basically that's what is it about. But as I said, it's mostly about when you aim for realistic, because with abstract, you are free to make whatever you want. And by the way, this particular setup was inspired by Yuri Bryan. So shout out to Yuri Bryan. When I saw this first time, I was quite like shocked. I was like, yeah, it's quite in a way magical. So I will quickly go through the setup. We have here some kind of geometry, doesn't matter what. I will go quite fast over the setup, but if I'm fast or you have any questions, feel free to ask. And I'm sure we can make the synthfaz available after the presentation. Okay, so I scatter some points here. Feed it into the fracture. A bit of exploded view. Then what we do, I edit the points really, which looks random, but it's directions that our velocity will look. And then we are subtracting our original position by these edited positions. And we fit into the velocity, which will look something like this. If we visualize, let's try to visualize, yes. So in a way, we control by this the scale and the direction of our velocity, our future fluid will travel. And then I will add just some noise to break it. This will be our source fluid, and I will transfer our velocity to this source. And the magical part about the setup is this, what I call like v-predict. So what we make this velocity, now I'm feeding this into the position. So I'm adding just the same what we made, but I'm adding into the current position. What it does, it shows us predict our shape of our splash. So it will look, if you simulate, it's gonna look something similar to this, but we get to see this without simulating. So we can test it right now. If you go to our dot network, reset, and let's simulate. Let's play it a couple of frames. I will just color it. I will template our, and you see it's like almost identical to our velocity predict. So this is a quite nice way to quickly iterate, quickly outdirect your splashes. You can do something similar with the Pyro toolset. Pyro gives this, I don't remember right now how it's called, but the sprite nose gives you this direction of the velocity. But this one I prefer because it's more controllable. You see exactly what's going on, and you have much more control over it. So that being said, we can change this noise set. We can play around with adding more noise, less noise. Getting back to our velocity. Change wherever we want to pieces go. Some small ones we can add. Yeah. And we go back to our, okay, now I have some crazy one over here. I didn't notice. Even though if we play like this, let's play. Yeah, exactly. It will try to go that direction, but this is a pretty crazy one. It goes outside of my boundary. But yeah, this is the main idea behind it. It gives you really nice and controllable splash. Going back to our presentation, in a way we will finish with this splash one. And what I would like to go next, it will be the project Ocnoplast we did with ArsThanea, with our talented team. I was responsible with creating the lava in these shots. I will quickly play the final video we did. With the audio. That was quite interesting and fun, and also challenging project to work on. Challenges in this one was getting realistic looking lava. It includes looking at many references and photos, videos, and of course many R&Ds to find the right look for it. In the next shots, I will go to, yes, here. Here's some breakdown of a UV map, the meshing, the temperatures, and here we see these long streams. That was one of the challenging things to make, because we see these long streams of lava starting from the top of the mountain. So my main R&D aim was how to find a way to simulate it fast without having to simulate hours from starting to beginning to the end. And also we'll go to the collision setup using the high fields, which will set up your collision setup much faster. So unfortunately, I don't have the scene file to play with it right here live. So I will go to the video recording that I did, and I will talk over. So we see these long lava streams. If I use ruler to measure, it's about 13. Yeah, it's about 100 meters long. So the question is how would you approach the simulation because it's a quite long road to travel for the water. My first initial thought was to fill up this stream with initial fluid, then simulate. But again, it took a lot of pre-sim frames to simulate. So what I found that worked the most, I create quite low-res, but quite forced simulation. Quite the opposite what I recommended in the previous slide when I said try to use less forces. Here I forced it as much as I can, so it reached our desired distance, in the least amount of time as possible, because this is gonna be the proxy simulation for our main simulation. So I let it simulate, and it's quite fast. Like, okay, I clear the cache, and this is actual simulation speed. So 3, 4, 5 frames per second. It will take probably 10-15 seconds for the whole simulation. So I use pop curve with quite high values to drive it fast. And that's basically it for our proxy. I will script a bit here. So once we had our proxy, I feed it right into the high resolution simulation. And high resolution simulation will have already the initial data of our proxy simulation. Pretty similar idea what we did in our previous splash simulation, because we did the initial velocities, we directed the initial velocities, but actual simulation had no forces. Pretty much the same approach here. We feed it into our high-res sim, and maximum we needed here, I would say 10 frames of pre-simulation. So here we see this is our proxy. I'm setting up the simulation here, and shortly I will play it. And it will take probably 5 to 10 frames to pick up the resolution. Yes, we see every frame it goes, it will become more high resolution, because it's a high resolution simulation coming from the proxy. And you save a lot of simulating time. This is our already meshed version. So basically I simulated around 10-15 frames to reach our desirable length. It's with quite fast time, and it's quite fast to iterate, quite fast to change. And it's quite simple, but that's the trick about it. Yes, and that's it. And then we merge then the respectively other streams. Of course, the part that we could hide, it's under the rock or behind the mountain. I could cut it into the 2 simulations or 3 simulations, but the ones that we see the full length, that was the challenging ones. But this way helped nicely. So let's see if we have any questions so far, because we are ending with our simulation chapter here, more like a fluid chapter. A couple words, if you don't have any questions, I will talk about collisions.
Here's one question in the chat. How do you feed pre-sim data into HQ?
Okay, that's a good question. It's just quite simple right away. I will show you that moment. Here is our proxy. I just fit right into the initial data of the high quality simulation. I will just see if I show inside of the .NET, which I should. Yes, so basically I am here. So it's pointing at my time shift. So pretty straightforward. It just goes into my first input, and I'm reading it as my initial data. And pretty much that's it. No velocity sourcing, no volume sourcing, just initial, and it will work pretty straightforward. Yeah, hopefully it answered the question. Okay, and let's go if there's no more question, we can move into the quickly talk about the collisions. Okay, for the collisions, if it's large environment, you will usually get quite heavy high poly geometry, which of course could be into VDB and then used, but still it will be quite heavy. So the nice approach we found out was using high field. I will play this. So what we do, we make a high field, similar size as our landscape, and we project our landscape onto our high field with the high field project. So right now we have a representation of our collision, our geometry that we have, but already as a volume. So this was 500,000 points, not too high, but still high. Right now it goes into volumes, and nice part about it that you get to use all the nice high field noise that we didn't provide, noises, masks. Now it's already, you have the full control as you would do over high field. I masked out the streams to make the water flow. I'm doing some noises here to make the patterns. I'm adding some rock assets, and again projecting it back to the high field. It's calculating and yeah, and now we have also rocks, and this is still all volume, all high field, which is a 2D volume basically, and it works pretty fast with flip as a collision. I even made the two versions with the sim resolution and high resolution for the rendering. I will quickly switch to the render version. And you see, you still have all the details that we want for the rendering. So I was quite surprised when I found out about this, that you can preserve quite of the details just using high field. And I will quickly show the test. And pretty much the same way it goes into collisions. Just only thing you have to switch here is to use volume collision and high fields, mode high fields. And it's quite fast. So when anything big, large landscape, high poly geometry, I would highly recommend to use this approach because it works quite fast. And this will conclude our part with fluids.
There was another question that popped up.
Sure.
Could you show us the point from the first sim where you pre-visualized how the fluid sim would look like?
It's about the previous setup, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question, Prob. I'm sure I forgot about that. Let's go back to, okay. If I understand right, it's about this, yeah, when we visualize. So what we do here, we are reading our velocity with OpenCloud, V, specifying V here. We're dividing just to have more, because by 1 it will be huge. It will be huge. We're dividing by 12. And we're just adding into our current position. And I'm adding this on our source. This will go into our fluid as a source. So I'm doing this on our source. So that's basically it. It's more like think about this as a displacement. We just use our velocity data to displace the points, as we would do like add noise, the same way we're adding to our current position. And here I'm just adding ramp to have more like fluid-like colors. And that's basically it. Okay, I'm checking the questions. Any tips for, I see any tips for meshing flips? That's a good question, and that's something it's quite often asked question. The thing is, I don't have any magic tips for the meshing. My only main advice is to have a good simulation. It seemed quite funny, quite straightforward, but if you have a good, let's say if you simulate, okay, this is a pretty good example. If you have a simulation looks like this, you see points are flying all over the place. Like, this is a good indicator. I will not be having a good mesh. I should do something about it. I should reduce my crazy velocities. I should more normalize or whatever I am. But when you simulate and your simulation looks quite nice, you have the nice shape, 90% of time you will not have any problem during the meshing. So when you make yourself a problem during the simulation, it will be quite a headache to figure out what to do in the meshing stage, because if your simulation looks like you are not sure and you're thinking it will be improved in the meshing, that's usually not going to happen. So my advice is always to simulate, see how your simulation looks. If you are happy, if it seems smooth, if it seems nice, if you visualize by vorticity or speed, colors look normal, like you don't have something like this. I will quickly, I want to show more normal examples, so I will quickly reduce our flank pieces here. I will just go back, go back. I'm trying to show how it's before I did these crazy changes. Okay. Let's change our noise a bit. Maybe add more. Let's simulate this. By the way, this is not a super high resolution. You can see the speed of it. It's quite fast. I think my main simulation was, I did like 0.1 here. It's 0.3, quite fast. Okay, but the idea is, right now, I can see and analyze this, how it's gonna look in the meshing. Like I have a couple small pieces here, but this is, I can tell it's mostly about resolution. But overall, the shape looks nice, looks smooth. I don't have anything crazy happening, nothing, no separate, no jaggy parts. So that tells us, so most likely you will not have any problem during the meshing. That's my simple but approach when it comes to meshing. And one more thing about meshing. Sometimes I didn't find why, but often I have an issue when I simulate meshes a bit like not surface but deep, for example here. And when it's transparent, I often have an issue with the flickering inside. It's not a flickering for the surface, but inside something happening. And usually it's happening with the standard meshing tools. And when you're having a problem like this, 99 out of 100, if you move to VDB approach, it will solve it. I don't know what's the difference between the standard workflow and VDB in that sense, what's happening behind the scenes, but there is something that usually gives the transparency because it's happening inside of the surface. You don't see when it's a gray surface, solid. When it's transparency, it gives some kind of flickering. So when you have something like this, I will suggest just go from the VDB, point from VDB, smooth, and pretty much that's it. Good. Okay, so let's move on. I will go into the next part. So, parametric tools animate or source or simulation. These are not simulating, animated masks, what would you call noises, along the surface based on points or the way you want. I practically use it, I would say, almost in my every project. When I want to mask something, when I want to drive some attributes. The first idea of this node, it came from Ben Watts. He was doing presentation a couple years ago, and I saw that he made the tool based on UV. So parameter will be animated over the UV. I started using it, and now I develop into the new versions, and I have a version with the point-based and some attribute-based, which we will go shortly. So this is the standard UV-based approach. You have any kind of geometry, you have UVs, and you have this tool that you can make by yourself. What you have is a initial frame, your last frame, and values in between, and you have some noise. And what you have control, it's like pretty much the, quite simple. You have initial. If you want to go faster, you will go half of the frames. It will be faster. It's quite simple, but quite useful for masking. It's quite similar to Pyro Spread, I would say, because Pyro Spread will give you more natural and organic, but I found often somewhat complicated to control it, to get the desired look. And also, Pyro Spread is a simulation on its own. So when you have a simulation, which based on a simulation, it's becoming a bit like one step more complexity for you to be able to control it. So this is my main tool I used almost. If I play my reel, I'm sure I will have at least a couple of projects that here even I used. I use TF right now. For the mask, I use tool based on this. Here, fluid, no. This car I use for these transitions, for this mask transition, this hexagon shapes. I use that mask again. And yeah, basically it's something I use quite often. This is a simple one along the UV. We also can make point-based, so you can scatter points. These are points, and it will just grow similar to the Pyro Spread in a way, but just more controllable. You have your Pyro, your points, and it will just grow. Quite simple. And what's happening inside? It's also quite simple. Just calculating the distance between your current position and our points, which is in this case scatter. This is our fit range, which we specify our initial and last frame, meaning this. And it goes into noise, and pretty much that's it. And this transform does the transformation in a way, because source of it's based on frame, which is time. This makes that animate. It makes that sense. And the last example, yes, it's attributes. We can have I have a font here, so we can make anything, and it will have a scattering point on our attributes. And yes, and we have it will respect our given attribute. Pretty much the same approach. I didn't prepare anything fancy for this part of presentation as a result. Yeah, but this is quite powerful. I can post these tools as a link after presentation. But these are quite powerful, quite simple but powerful. It gives you quite flexibility into your sourcing, into masking, mask to blend shapes together or whatever. I would highly recommend you look into this. So I will make sure this will be available for people who will be interested. And yes, this will be our parametric tools for masking, animating, and sourcing your simulation. So let's move on. Yes, point level control. This is the part when we'll focus on controlling on post-simulation. After simulating, after caching is done, after the simulation is done, things we can do to have extra control, maybe add extra complexity. In the first example, I have a recent R&D that I did called data flow. It was looking something like this. And in this first example, it's an example with attribute transfer. So what I have something like quite simple simulation, which is just a noise on XYZ distance, which will make points stick to the surface. So I have quite simple animation here. And what I do to have more technical look, like more data kind of look, I take my source, which is the simple plane. This is where I source my simulation onto my particles. And I do attribute transfer. Normal attribute transfer. Only key part is we transfer the position and we check book this, allow P attribute. So will it do? It will try to attract the points to the points of our input. In other words, it looks something like this. So yes, you can see it tries to attract. If I go crazy high, it will also almost match identical to the points of this grid, the position. So it's quite simple, but quite interesting. You can get quite interesting result with this. This will be our sample count. It gives quite interesting patterns. And I combine a couple layers with this. For example, this one, another layer. Yes. You can play around with the threshold, the count. This will be like more like a smoothness fall off. Yeah, it will give quite interesting patterns. You can also right now what I do, I take my grid, I keep only the lines and I scatter points. Even if I hide the points and I keep only the spline, yeah, it gives even more interesting patterns. And of course, you can animate it, can change it. And if I put simple transform and animate this scale. Yeah, this is quite simple, but again, quite useful. Now you can get crazy patterns like this. And what I did, I merged a couple layers. And that was the idea of this R&D behind this. But this is the first example with the attribute transfer. My second example It's something with the Pyro. And that's the interesting part, because we are talking about manipulating on a point level, but here we have volume. So the same way, with the, I don't remember which version, but a recent version of Houdini gave us this latest from volume node, which what it allows us to do, takes a volume and made points out of it. So we can do all the point tools that you know, deformers, twist, anything you can use on this level and control back, transfer it back into Pyro. So in that example, I'm trying to have, this is what my simulation looks like out of box. And this is quite often occurring issue when you want to have Pyro coming out of really like centered point. I remember I had this issue when I wanted to have more small origin of point, and I tried to add more resolution, some forces, some divergence, some negative divergence. It was still not what I aimed for. And later I found this approach that you can transfer into points. Pretty much the same approach. Takes our geometry here and attribute transfer these points to our sphere here, this geometry. And it makes this kind of fall off that you can control. And we convert it back to volumes, and we have this. I will template our. So I think this is quite powerful thing to have in your tools. It's simple, but think about, you can use any point like magnets at deformers, so it gives you quite of a freedom there to play around. This will be it about this approach. And the third one what I have, it's magnets. This is something that I think magnets overall are the oldest part of overall 3D and also Houdini. Often they are simply overlooked. And here I have simple simulation like this. It's just particle advection. And I want to have some extra control after the simulation, which I have with simple metaballs. Metaballs goes into magnet, and it gives you this kind of fall off. Think about, I'm sure many people know, similar to Cinema 4D, you have your field effectors, your planar effectors. Similar to that, it gives you a smooth fall off, which it can do. You can control position. Right now, what I do, I control the rotation here. Now rotation. And I can create some kind of vortex tunnel out of it. It's quite fast too. And the source of it is a metaball. So as you know, metaballs love merging together. They make this kind of interesting melty look. So we can make few of them and connect. And you will get something like this. So this is quite simple but interesting way also to keep in mind in your arsenal. Also, one of my favorite tools, simple but effective, can help you in many ways. So this is the last one from our post-simulation control tools. Let's go back to our presentation and see if we leave anything else out, which I believe, yeah, I believe this will be all from me today. please let me know if you have any kind of question. I really hope you get something out of today's presentation, some small tips or tricks that will speed up your workflow. So I will open the chat and see if you have any questions. If you guys are interested, I will make available the sim files for you to check, download. Often I try often to post on my Gumroad. I have a couple, these are all for free, by the way. I share some R&D project files that you can go into the link here and just download, play around. And also feel free to check my YouTube. I make tutorials time to time. I'm not very consistent with it, which I try. And yeah, that will be it from me today. Thanks again. Thanks for having me.
So I do see a question in the chat. Does any other node come to your mind when you are thinking about the most powerful but forgotten nodes?
That's a quite good question. Let me think about it. Forgotten node.
Maybe a tricky one.
I'm sure there are many. Right now, off top of my head, it's hard to think of. But what was in my head, I put in the presentation. For the rest, I had to think, because if you ask me overall, it will be the magnets. I think it's quite simple and not many people know about it. Everyone knows about metabots, but this magnet tool and that you can control points, can have some kind of fall-off. Yeah, that's something I would say the most overlooked node. The same way like a attribute transfer, right? It's similar. You use it for the transferring attribute from node to other node. It's quite interesting that there is this checkbox for a position, and you can attract position to position and give interesting.
Okay, here's another one. Are you a fan of using the gas microsolvers for flip?
Oh, this is something that I'm not that fluent to. I use a couple of them that I for often workflow, like gas temperature one. The one was used for the lava project, for example, for the temperature. Simple ones, turbulence, disturbance, but these gas microsolvers are whole deep place that you can dig forever and forever. So this is something that I would like to discover more, and there is a much more place to discover for sure. So this is something that I'm looking into to learn more for sure.